Hello.
All right, we're there.
Is that everybody?
Deal. Yeah.
The whole crew?
Yep, we're here.
Oh, dang.
Nice.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is your co-host, Mark Hilsing. I will be joined tonight by Steve Speck, as well as Lenny Nelson and Jason Wright. Steve, Lenny Nelson, and their buddy Tyler. Those are the guys from the Pure Elevation crew. If you're not familiar with them, check out pure-elevation.com for some awesome hunting films. Anyway, they just got back from Alaska, so we kind of recapped their trip, which was awesome and horrible, it sounds like. So you have to listen in to hear all about that. But first, wanted to give a shout out to Bill Nation. Bill sent us an awesome email, including some field pics with his Exo Mountain Gear pack. As you probably know, this podcast is brought to you by Exo Mountain Gear. And we wanted to pick Bill as a giveaway winner this week. So how this is going to work for you guys. 2 ways to win this week. One, like normal, send us an email with some feedback, a question, a guest that you want to see on this podcast. Send that email to podcast@exomountaingear.com or leave us a review at iTunes. That's kind of the normal way that you can enter the weekly giveaway. Or two, if you are an Exo Mountain Gear user, now that seasons are rolling, you guys have probably been out in the field, send us your field photos to photos@exomountaingear.com, and we will pick 2 winners next time, one from each of those methods. So certainly don't have to be an Exo user to win, but if you are, here's kind of a bonus way to get into the goods. So this podcast, we kind of had some technical difficulties. There's a few hiccups that are still you're going to hear, and we also kind of missed a little bit of the beginning, just trying to get all 4 guys on the line. So we kind of dive into the show here in 1 second, but just want to give you some background. We had started talking about already this Alaska trip for moose, and kind of the way that this trip was set up is that the guys went through a service not for a guided hunt, but, to get the drop camp, to get all the flights arranged, the spots determined. All that was through the service of a guide. So once they hit the ground, they were hunting on their own, but we just kind of set up the stage that this was a hunt assisted by, travel and logistics and even the place to hunt with a guide service. So we kind of pick up talking about the travels and things like that. Hope you enjoy the show. It's certainly entertaining to hear how well the hunt went and how bad it went all at the same time. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys can relate to that. So anyway, enough of that. Let's get on to the show. Here's Steve, Lenny, Jason, and myself talking Alaska moose. Let's talk about just getting to Alaska. What extra precautions or anything like that did you take? What headaches did you have to go through just with all the travels with, gear and weapons and things of that nature?
Honestly, we got pretty lucky. Some of it just blind luck. I guess maybe some of the surprises. With a bow, they don't really care. The only thing they want is, broadheads, I think, in a container. But with a gun, there was definitely an extra step. Steve actually almost missed the plane flying out. Literally, they're about ready to close the door. Just because of checking the gun. We had extra step. You have to open it up. They look through it. You have to make sure all your bullets are in factory boxes. You can't just have like a bullet in your clip or bullets in your bag. Also, if your case has any locks on it, for example, our case had 2 locks on it. You're required to have a lock if it is lockable. So we had to have 2 locks on our case. So definitely, allow yourself some extra time and just make sure that, the ammo is in factory and also make sure you got enough locks. Those are probably really the big things. Besides that, it was just trying to get everything to fit and not have to pay exorbitant baggage fees.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine even just domestically for the quote-unquote big flight up to Alaska. But Jason, what was it like getting to Alaska, and then I'm sure transitioning to a small plane? Did they have obviously specific weight limits and things like that per person, how much gear you could have?
Yeah, I think we could have like 70 pounds of personal gear, not including or not counting the stuff we rented from them. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, not counting we rented a few things. That 70 pounds was pretty much just your personal gear. It wasn't food and it wasn't your weapon. But
Oh,
then
wow.
everything else brought with you. So it
So
was
that's
kind of, I don't think we were close to hitting that. Maybe had 50 pounds, 40 to 50 pounds of personal gear. So
yeah. If
Yeah,
it
we were
doesn't
pretty
include
light.
food and weapon, that's plenty.
yeah, oh yeah.
So what?
So
what
on the way up, on the way up, Tyler came a couple days later. So it was the three of us heading up, and they offer an outfitted option with this outfitter where they provide all the food and camp, all that gear. Well, we decided to kind of do a mix of our own stuff, and so I had a cooler full of basically dry goods, and Tyler was going to bring a lot of the frozen stuff later on. And I think Lenny and Steve, you guys had like a tote and another thing full of food.
Yeah, we had
Pretty much a tote.
pretty much a tote. We had two totes. We had one of the black like action packer totes, and then just like a standard Rubbermaid tote that all of our food was in.
So was that all just straight checked baggage when you guys were flying? Those totes?
Yeah. It was a pain in the ass the night before leaving for the trip because Lenny made a trip to Winco and just bought all sorts of freaking food, and then I'm sitting there trying to load it in these totes, and I'm like, freaking Lenny, it's not fitting, you know. And then I put half of it in there, and it weighed like 55 pounds. I was like, son of a. So that was the one over 50. You know, your baggage fee went from $25 to $75. At least I think every airline is different, but that was Alaska Airlines. You know, trying to figure out how to keep it under 50 pounds and get enough food for the whole trip, which that's something else we'll get into because Lenny and I about ran out of food. So
Yeah. Well, yeah.
it's kind of
Let's talk on that. If you guys did it again, would you go through the headaches of packing your own food and worrying about those weight limits versus I'm sure that it was an option where they can, provide more food or gear up there. What decisions did you make on what to rent and what to bring? And then if you're doing it, next year, would you do the same thing? How about that, Steve?
Man, that's a tough call because it was an extra 1,000 or 1,500?
1,000
extra 1,000 to the outfitted
per person.
Per person. So $2,000 for Lenny camp to have all of our food and gear there, and we probably did it for $400 total. Yeah. So you're saving $1,600 there. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But we were so busy with work right before leaving and just so stressed out. There was like one more thing. I guess if money's not a huge issue, I personally would do the outfitted just for the ease of just flying up there with your clothes and your weapon. But trying to save money, and if you got the time to plan it all out, weeks in advance, of course, we're at freaking midnight the night before we fly out at 6 a.m. So it's kind of a stressful moment there, but I guess it's all good.
So what you mentioned rentals, what gear did you guys rent, Jason?
We rented a tent, camp stove, a kitchen kit for two people, which basically was like 2 plates, 2 bowls, 2 things of silverware, 2 cups, and stuff to cook with. So tent, cots, stove, and kitchen kit was basically it. The tent, we were thinking it was going to be like a big Cabela's, like a Lacnac, or like a stand-up tent. It was basically a little pop-up dome tent that you couldn't stand up inside, and 2 cots took up the entire floor space of that tent. So it wasn't really what we were expecting, but I mean, it kept us dry. It was a good tent for the most part. So the rest of it, we brought ourselves food, coffee, etc.
Yeah, I would definitely be picturing it as like a big canvas wall tent or something when you think guided tent option in Alaska.
Right. Yeah. Jason, how tall was that tent? Lenny and I were curious.
It was. We did at one point when we thought we were going to get picked up by the float plane. We broke down our camp, took the cots out, and we put our camp chairs inside there so we could sit there and play cribbage out of the rain. And it was big. You could sit in a camp chair and your head would be touching the ceiling of it. So it's probably 50 inches or so.
Right. Okay.
But pretty tight quarters. Considering it was I think it was $550 to rent that tent for 15 days. So, almost would have just assumed bought my own tent and took it up.
Yeah.
But hindsight.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of us would agree that in hindsight, we probably all skimped on the tent. I mean, if I had to do over again, I would get some sort of tent that you could stand up in, stretch out in, and just get out of the rain and the elements and get dry, because that was definitely our biggest challenge. Is just you're wet all the time, and with a little dome tent, you just cannot get dry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lenny, I don't know if we would have had a big enough dry spot to put our tents on. That's literally not a joke.
You guys needed a float
What was your
tent.
camp name?
It was called Camp Wet Beaver.
Oh man.
And ours, I kind of coined ours Camp Swamp Donkey by the end of it because we were in water.
Well, let's talk about that and even fill listeners in. Lenny, you were talking about, we had Jason and Tyler in one camp, Steve and yourself, Lenny, in another camp. How far apart were they? What's the reasoning for the different camps? Can you kind of dive into those decisions?
Yeah, so initially we all wanted to hunt together because we don't get to do that often. But the guide highly suggested that we split up, and obviously spending the kind of time and money. He said, to be successful, we think you guys should be on 2 different lakes. So we said, all right, well, can you get us within 5-6 miles apart, and we'll just break down camp. If 2 of us are successful, we'll just go join the other group. And they said, okay, we'll try to do that. And they were able to do that. So Jason and Tyler, I think they were about 5-6 miles to the northwest of us, at another larger lake. And Steve and I, we were kind of at a smaller lake, which the idea was great, but what happened is, where we ended up going was basically on the Yukon Delta, where it's all tundra, lakes, and swamps. And honestly, this sounds crazy for a guy in the lower 48, but I think it was impossible to hike 5-6 miles because of the water.
Yeah.
There are just so many water features between the lakes and the rivers and the sloughs that unless you had somewhere crossing that, it's like you can't go cross country until it all freezes over. It was definitely kind of mind opening on the challenges of hunting up there. And so the option of getting to those guys was slim, except we had 5 days to sit and think about it. We had a route planned that Steve would not do with me. That there was a river that went like 3 miles. We could have got within 2 miles of their camp, and I think we could have did it, but Steve, why don't you go?
Yeah, there's like this kind of, they call it a river. It's more of like a really long slough that went 10 miles and connected back to the Yukon River. And we could have got within 2 miles of the camp, but there was still, like, on our Delorme and Reach, the mapping software showed like 2 other water, kind of like you couldn't tell if they were a stream or a bog or what. But I was just like, I chickened out, basically. I was like, Lenny, who the hell knows what we're getting into? Yeah. A freaking 5-hour adventure could turn into a 3-day nightmare. So, yeah, we didn't do it. But
So, it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, to cover, this 5 or 6 miles, which makes me think, how far could you guys cover from camp to hunt? How far? I know that some of the shots were really close to camp, but how much ground was covered from camp for the actual hunting, much less getting to somebody else's camp?
The furthest we ever got from camp was, I think, 1.5 miles, and we basically just hit a river. I can't remember the name of the river, Tic Tac or some sort of, any kind of random assortment of consonants, put that together and call it a river. We couldn't get past that. So, yeah, the furthest we got was 1.5 miles, which feels like when you sink to your shin in swamp and muskeg, that feels like 5 miles. But
yeah, Lenny and I were, the first 2 days we got there. I guess we can kind of back up and just start, like, we got there. When did we get there? Thursday night?
Yep.
We got lucky. They flew us out Friday morning, jumped in the little float plane. They loaded the 3 of us up in one plane and all of our gear in another. We took off, and they were going to land Lenny and I first and then go land Jason. And when we landed, we were literally in a flat freaking swamp. Like, the plane dropped us off, and Lenny and I are just looking at each other like, where in the hell are we? Like, we had this big image in our head of Alaska, right? Of like these beautiful country and mountains, and we could see like 30 yards to brush, and not a mountain in sight over the top of that. So it kind of puts in perspective. It's just completely and utterly flat country out there. So the first 2 days it rained, just poured rain. I mean, Jason, you were 5 miles away, but I'm sure it was no different. I mean, it was nonstop rain for 48 hours. The first day, Lenny and I decided they gave us this little kayak to kayak around on the lake, and it was raining and so freaking windy that we were like, it was whitecaps out on the lake. We were afraid to get in this little rink-a-dink kayak and paddle anywhere. So Lenny and I are like, well, I guess all we can do is hike. And how far did we go that first day, Lenny?
And I think it was only about a mile.
Yeah,
if that, yeah. And it was just trying to kind of circle around the lake since we couldn't get in the lake, and it was just, and like Jason said, I mean, honestly, a mile, it probably felt even worse than 5 miles. Yeah. And then you picture killing something, a moose, and try to walk through, knee-deep muskeg where you sink every shin or every step. It just almost seemed impossible, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah. And so we just circled the lake. So I bet you we were never more than 400 yards away from the lake. But it's just a different world. I mean, we don't, look twice at going hike 5 miles somewhere. But to hike a mile away from that lake would just be suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's wild. So at that same time, Jason, you were in camp alone for a couple of days. Was it raining, and what was it like just kind of being in camp in Alaska in that type of place, kind of solo?
Yeah, I forgot a lot of things. I didn't have any garbage bags. I didn't have any tarps. So I spent most of my time in the tent. I'd poke my head out, and I was camped right on a moose trail and right on the edge of a lake. And we landed. We were flown in Friday, right? And you can't hunt the day that you fly, so we couldn't hunt until Saturday. And I looked out in the lake Saturday morning, and there's 4 bulls out in the lake, and one of them's just a giant, and it's an absolute monsoon. I can barely see that they're moose, but once they turn their heads, I'm like, oh yeah, those are moose. And then I just went back in the tent because there's nothing I can do. I'm not going to shoot them out in the water by myself. And so yeah, I spent the first 2 days in the tent playing cribbage on my phone and eating peanut butter and jelly because I didn't want to go outside and cook in the rain. So it was pretty miserable first 2 days.
Yeah. Wow. So speaking of those, that weather, those just general conditions of Alaska, what specific gear did you guys sort of add to the list for this trip? And then how did that work out for you? And what gear do you wish you brought that you didn't? How about that, Steve?
I mean, I guess there's a lot of different stuff than we take from a normal backpacking trip as far as like camping themes, but the 2 things that jump out to me are hip waders and dry bags. And I wish, like Jason said, that we brought a ton of trash bags, and that those weigh nothing, and they're a good little waterproof thing. But we literally lived in our hip waders. That was the first thing on in the morning and the last thing off when you went into bed. And at the end of those 2 days of rain, we had pitched our tent, and there's not even really a dry spot anywhere there, because if you stand somewhere long enough and jump up and down, water starts coming out of the ground underneath you. I mean, and literally, so our tent was on a little bit of a rise, and thank God we did rent cots from them there, and they're like those really low profile. They sit like 6-8 inches off the ground. But I'm pretty sure we would have been wet at some point sleeting if we didn't have those. So after day 2, we literally had water in our tent vestibule. Like 90% of the vestibule was about 2 to 3 inches of water. And it was just a low spot right outside the tent, and then there's kind of some low spots that went underneath the tent, and it was just like, I don't know. And we were in water for 12 days straight, except sleeping. We had a 10 by 20 tarp that we set up right next to the tent. We had to cut out some brush to be able to even do that. And literally our table and our chairs were sitting in water the whole frickin' time. And there was 2 little humps that we'd pile all of our frickin' gear on because they were the only dry spots you could put anything. So it definitely became challenging of, just keeping things dry. And then the sun would barely ever come out. It was tough.
Yeah. I know you, Jason, you mentioned earlier we were chatting about sort of a little lesson you learned with the hip waders and something you might have done different with footwear. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, so we all got these, I think they're called Neos over boots that you wear over top of your hunting boot. And I, in the last minute planning, I got them like 10 days before we left. I didn't put them on with my Solomons, and my Solomons wouldn't fit in them. So I was like, well, I got no other choice. So I brought a pair of camp shoes, which are just like a pair of running shoes, all mesh, no waterproof, anything. I was like, well, these will be my camp shoes. And then I just was like, well, I'm going to have to wear these camp shoes inside this boot. And so, with condensation and sweat and rain running down the hip boot or water off the brush, by the end of the day, my running shoes were basically wet. But, the hip boots were great. They kept water out, but they also hold water in them.
Yeah.
So that was an oversight on my part. I should have had some good waterproof boots that would actually fit in those inside those hip boots.
Yeah.
And poor Tyler, no one told Tyler that we were going to the swamps. We kind of pulled an audible. The outfitter said, "Are you guys willing to hunt a more difficult area if there's more moose and bigger moose?" And we're like, "Well, sure. What can be hard about country that's flat as a pancake?" Well, yeah, swamps is what was hard about it. So Tyler didn't have adequate over boots. He had these real lightweight, I think they're called Wiggies.
Yep.
And he ripped them in the first 3 days. And Tyler's one tough dude. He basically was walking around in water for 10 straight days and 32-degree groundwater. He had mild frostbite by the end of the trip.
Wow. Did he just stop wearing the waders?
Yeah, he's wearing them, and we had like a bagel, bread sacks and bagel sacks from our food.
Oh my gosh.
He put them over his socks and then slip that inside of his boot. And so
That's what my mom used to do when I played in the snow when I was like 7.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know he stopped wearing them. I thought that he just did a duct tape repair and they leaked. I can't even imagine how bad that was.
Yeah, it was. After I got my moose, I said, "Do you want to wear mine for a day?" And he was just like in hog heaven, running around. He's like, "These things are amazing," just he'd go through swamps up above his knee, and like, "Oh yeah, I'm good."
Oh man,
that's crazy.
Oh, I literally can't imagine how bad that was for Tyler. Yeah. Oh, Lenny and I was complaining because at one point in the middle of the trip, I had stepped into what seemed like, oh no, Lenny, because we were crossing that thing and you were using the trekking pole check. You're like, "I don't think it's good." I'm like, "Oh, it's fine." And
cowboy, it's fine, Lenny. We're gonna go.
I stepped out into it and got in the middle and just started sinking, and water came over the top of my hip waders, and then my shoes were wet basically for a couple days till we saw the sun. I was able to get them dried out. But that was miserable. I can't imagine how bad that was for Tyler. Oh,
yeah, he's tough for sure.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Lenny, you're known for beating the piss out of gear in normal conditions. So, what did you manage to ruin on this trip with these conditions?
Actually, I think I actually did pretty well on this trip. We used the First Light rain gear, and I wore that stuff pants and coat every day until bed, and that stuff held up awesome in the brush. I mean, I was really surprised. I thought I would have ripped it, but besides that, I don't think I broke anything. Did I, Steve?
No. Yeah, I kind of took over your role. So
yeah, he did actually. Yeah. He forgot stuff on every point we went to, and and he broke our one and only bones / wood saw.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
The second day, it was raining so bad that we were trying to start a fire, and everything is so wet there that Steve and we're bored. I mean, we're just bored out of our mind. Steve and I resorted to, we had a saw, and we were sawing off these little tiny pieces of wood and literally like shavings, trying to get a fire going for 2 straight days. And he broke it doing that.
Yeah, we didn't have something we would have brought. It would have been a hatchet. So you could get to the inside of the dry wood, but we were cutting like little 2-inch pieces of probably a 2-inch diameter log that was half rotten. And then I was trying to split one with the freaking kitchen knife we had. I started beating it against the saw because it was like the only firm thing laying around. Just hitting into the freaking muskeg wasn't doing anything. And after about 4 or 5 things, the saw broke. So, that was definitely like you know, I think Jason, you had said some guy told you to bring as much duct tape as you possibly can, and I think duct tape and super glue would have been two things. We had duct tape, but we didn't have super glue. And I think I could have glued the thing back together and then taped it and made it work again. But yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, probably one of the biggest things that we figured out is, in the lower 48, for the most part, you're less than a day hike back to your truck, no matter where you are. I mean, if you really need to get out of there, you can get out of there. And not having that safety valve all of a sudden, like, really, for example, our lighters, like day 2, my lighter quit working and I didn't have an extra one. And then so Steve pulls his out and his stops working. And then it's like, holy crap, what are we going to do? We got 10 more here. So definitely just that redundancy that's required when you go on one of these hunts is so important. I mean, I don't know how many, 2 of everything that you can, just because you're there for that long. And if something fails, it's critical, it's kind of a big deal. On the lighter, what we figured out is there's just so much humidity there and it's so wet that you have to keep your lighter on you, like in your pocket at all times, or otherwise the striker just gets moist and it won't light.
Mm. Yeah, that seems like
on a trip where you don't have a weight restriction, you might as well bring 2 of everything. It's a no-brainer to do that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we definitely screwed up there.
Yeah, I think it's
because
I think it's a military saying that 2 is 1 and 1 is none, and it seems like that certainly applies in this case.
Yeah, I would say so.
Cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I'm trying to think of what gear that I wished we would have had. Like you said, I mean, I think a hatchet would have been a nice thing. Steve and I, we made a list while we were there.
Yeah, hatchet. Trail cameras.
Yes.
Yeah,
that was
that too.
That was Lenny's idea. Yeah.
For these moose, it's they're elusive things for being so big, but we really thought, because you could basically cover ever how many trail cameras you have, multiply U times the number of trail cameras and set those up, and you could get a feel for the country, because all of a sudden you're landing in this place, it's completely foreign. We didn't totally understand moose habitat or moose habits, and so if we could have went out, set up 4 or 5 trail cams, we probably could have had a good idea where to focus by day 4 or 5 rather than day 10 or 11.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So
we were definitely. That was the thing we got when we landed there. It was just kind of like, oh crap, how do we hunt this? You can't glass. The only option to glass was if you sat out on the lake, and during the whole trip. I guess we saw 9 total moose on our trip, and most of them were by the lake. But that's over freaking 10 days of hunting. It's not even a moose a day. Sitting there watching the edge of the lake. So having trail cameras would have been huge just to give you more eyes in places that you can't be. So
yeah, let's transition to sort of like hunting tactics for moose, which I think is an unknown for a lot of guys. I know that calling can be a big thing. Is that typically just like cold calling and waiting for a response? Do they call back? Did they just kind of come in? What was your experience with calling specifically? Jason, how about you?
Well, we were reading articles and watching YouTube videos on the flight up, and the consensus was that they will come to the calls in 4 to 24 hours. But for a bunch of elk hunters, where we call and if we don't hear a bugle and we move on, that's really hard to do. So I'd set up and I'd call for 4 hours, and I'd be like, I don't know if nothing can hear me, or they're not coming, or if they're going to be here in 20 hours from now. And you just don't know. So you sit there and call, and it's like, well, nothing came, so let's go to the next spot. And for all we know, right after we left, a bull might have meandered in and thought, well, there was a cow here,
Yeah.
So it was, and it's so thick that you can't glass. So the only real option was calling. And from what we found out was the rut was 15 days behind schedule or so, and they weren't coming to calls, so it just made it really hard to find moose.
Yeah. So you guys were supposed to be there in sort of the peak of the rut, or at least a hot time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be kind of like the start, and then by the end of it should have been the peak, and instead I think the end of it was the start.
Right. Yeah.
So as far as calling strategies, I was there for 3 days by myself at first. I was just doing a mix of cow calls, like I didn't, I just had this moose calling app on my phone that kind of gave me a basic understanding of it. I do a mix of like kind of a long cow call, long and moany, and then I do a couple grunts, and I rake the hell out of a tree, break sticks as much as I could, and then I just sit and wait, and 5 minutes later I do that whole thing over again. And yeah, nothing in the first 3 days of doing that. Didn't see anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
wow.
Very frustrating and tough.
We're pretty similar to, the first 2 days was so windy and rainy that we got out and hiked and didn't see a single moose. We saw tracks in that like muskeg, but we really didn't have any there was no way to tell if that was that morning or a year ago. We didn't know.
Yeah,
Nothing
especially
looked
with it being
fresh.
so wet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so wet. Nothing looked fresh. It was just kind of trail slash tracks that we'd see kind of all over the place. And then we did see quite a few rubs. You could obviously tell a rub. It wasn't like what we're used to where it's like, it's either a fresh rub or it's not. Because I think it's so wet up there and all the wood's kind of half rotten. We did see rubs, so we kind of knew there was moose there. We just we weren't seeing them, and we were just, Lenny and I are just scratching our freaking heads, like, what do we do here? By the end of it, we decided, we'd been a lot better if we were whitetail hunters, because they're a little bit more used to this type of hunting where it's really kind of completely blind, and you find natural funnels and figure out ways to, maybe just do a little bit of calling and sit and wait. And that's really what, at the end, we kind of decided, that's how you moose hunt, at least that country, is find a natural area that the moose will travel through and sit and wait and call.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can kind of use like the pinch point type strategy where it's like, based on cover, terrain, or whatever they have to move through here, it looks like there's sign, and you can kind of go for the ambush type strategy.
Right. Yeah, but the big problem with that is like literally it's so flat that you can't tell. There's no natural features. And a moose, I mean, we watched them. They would swim right across the lake like it wasn't even there. So that was almost not even a natural feature for them. It was just, it was really tough to nail that down because it's just like, I don't know. It was very rare, I guess, that I think Steve and I ever felt like we found. Maybe towards the end, we kind of found one little area where it's like, okay, this kind of makes sense. There's a river and a lake and a little high spot. But beyond that, it was really tough to identify that.
Yeah.
So do bull moose ever call on their own, or they're pretty much just responding to calls? I mean, one of the coolest things about elk hunting is even when you're not calling or, through the night, you're just hearing these bulls fire off. Did you guys hear any calls?
We heard some grunt. We got to where we weren't convinced they were responding to our cow calls or even that our cow calls were good. So we got to where we just kind of walk and listen because when they're walking through the alders, you can totally hear their horns banging on brush, and like there's a moose walking around in there because it's so tight and they're 7 feet or 6 feet tall. They're going to make some noise. And so there were some times where we did hear a bull walking through the trees, and it basically sounds like someone has either a 2x4 or a piece of OSB or plywood, and they're just walking through brush. And we'd hear that just this grunt like over and over again. And it's like, okay, that's obviously a bull there, but they would never come out of the alders to us, no matter what we did, rake, grunt, cow call. They were content in the alders, and they were not coming out in the open.
Yeah.
That was the frustrating part.
Yeah, we very similar experience. Our tactic after, I don't know, day 4, once Lenny and I kind of starting to get the hang of things, was one guy would go hike. There's a couple prominent points on the lake. Our lake had a bunch of small fingers, and there's a couple prominent points where you could sit and kind of see a good portion of the shoreline. So the other guy would hike in like 300-400 yards and call and sit for 5 hours or something, and then the other guy would just sit on the edge of the lake and glass. And there's a couple times when the wind died down, I could hear. That's actually how we ended up killing our bulls. Was I could hear the horns raking brush, kind of off in the distance. So, yeah, I definitely think, answer your question, Mark, that I think they're just, everything a moose does is just so slow. You know, that's a good way to put it, is that it's not like a bull, you know, if he's calling and screaming and stuff like that, even on his own, it's all kind of happening pretty fast. A moose is just, it's very slow, methodical. What, Lenny, you were always kind of talking about how, like, when they walk, it's so, like, with so much certainty, you know, they're just like, boom, this is where I'm freaking going.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we ever saw a moose run.
No, not once. Not once.
Not once.
Yeah.
They just walked. Yeah.
We did.
Did you?
Probably the most thrilling experience besides our actual kills were the only thing I can figure out what happened was it'd be like walking into a bedding area with elk and kind of stepping on a herd bull, to where he's in there, he's got cows, and you throw out a bugle and he comes over to literally just kick your ass. So we were following a moose trail. It opened up into kind of a meadow. We sat down. I started raking a tree, and we haven't had any success at this point. We're just like, we don't know shit about anything. We don't know what we're doing. And so I rake this tree, and I go over to Tyler. I'm like, the moose will be here in 5 minutes. Just joking around, you know. And so we sit down and eat some food and look up, and here comes paddles coming through the willows. I'm like, holy crap, there's a moose coming. And we didn't even have our weapons ready. Tyler's bow was on his pack. The rifle, which I was packing, was on my pack. And so we're getting ready, and he comes around this tree, and he's like he's a big bull. He's 50-something to 60-something, just a big bull. And he starts doing the sway where his horns start turning side to side, and like he's posturing coming at us. And at that point, I'm like, because I had the rifle basically ready, and I'm like, Tyler, well, let's get him with a bow. If he's coming to us, you know, he's going to come in and we'll stick him with the bow. And at that point, he was straight downwind. He got our wind, and he took off running. So not only did he come to the call, the raking, in less than 5 minutes, he also came in downwind, smelled us, and was gone as soon as he got there. So that's the fastest we saw a moose move, period.
Wow.
But it was exciting.
So is there much concern like with their vision, or is like just getting winded one of the main things that can bust that? Is there any sense that you guys have for that, like how well they see or hear, or is just, you know, scent a main factor there?
Scent and hearing, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it seemed like vision, like they would maybe skirt a little bit if they didn't quite know, because we had a bullet swim across the lake, and Steve got about 46 yards from him, and he kind of saw it and didn't kind of recognize us, and he kind of skirted us, but he never ran. Yeah, so definitely, I think wind is everything with them.
Yeah. Cool. Let's kind of dive into some of the success here. All four of you guys were able to get a bull. Lenny, I know you were the only one that was able to stick one with a bow. So let's start with you. What was the story like? How did it play down for you?
Well, So by this time, I think we killed our moose on day 6 or 7. But prior to this, you know, I don't know how else to say it. It sucked. And we were texting our guide saying, we want to get the heck out of here. This place sucks. We're not seeing any moose. This is what we expected. And frankly, we were wanting to leave. It wasn't playing to our strengths, and honestly, it wasn't the experience that we were hoping for.
Yeah, we were wanting to get moved to a new spot.
Yeah. So we were telling him, hey, move us to a new spot. And they said, stick it out for a couple more days. Yeah, so we did. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to ask, you know, what was their response to that? How receptive were they? And
their response was, there's more moose per square mile in this area than anywhere else. And basically, you just got to keep at it.
Yeah.
Which I actually believe that there are a lot of moose in that type of area, but the ability to hunt them, and especially to hunt them with a bow, it's very difficult. And I don't know how else to put it, but it doesn't take a lot of skill. In my opinion, it just takes a lot of patience.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, you know, we're kind of more of the mindset that, you know, the harder you work, the more opportunity you have, the more chance of success you're going to have. It almost worked backwards. That's how I felt about it. It's like the harder you worked, and maybe this is for whitetail hunters, this is how it is. You know, I think maybe some places our scent got spread, and maybe it wasn't working because of that. And so just how we hunt and what we like to do wasn't working very well there. But, sticking it out, it was my day to hunt. Steve and I, we had a paddle between a mile and a half in this kayak every day. And, it's a little inflatable 2-man kayak with your gear and your 2 weapons. And honestly, it scared the hell out of us every time we got in it. We're just like, tip over in this lake. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're going to freeze to death. It was pretty sketchy. I told Steve, like, man, I better not tell my wife about this.
Yeah.
Especially if you're wearing, like, your hip boots.
And we were. Yep, we were wearing hip boots because otherwise you were soaking wet and the rain gear. And it was, if you tipped over, it would have been tough to get out and figure out how to get back to camp. And but it's the only way to do it there. So we go out there and we go to this little point, and I'm trying to think how that happened that morning. Actually, help me out here, Steve.
So you were shooter that morning, and I was out on the point glassing.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And I went in the back and I was calling. And kind of what Jason said is so 2 days before, I went to the spot and I was calling, and it was one of the only really still nights that we had where you could just hear anything. It called all the way up in the dark, nothing came. Next day, Steve was shooter, and that day we went to a different point, but by 10 o'clock, there was like a bull right where I was calling. It was like 20 or 15 hours later, there was a bull there. But by that point, we couldn't get on him. So I went back to that same spot, hoping he was still in the area. I called, met back up with Steve, and while I was sitting there, Steve had glassed 2 small bulls sparring maybe like a half mile up the lake. And so we jumped back in the kayak, we paddled down there, and we kind of get to a spot where we think we can kind of sneak in there and kind of as we're sneaking in there, you got to remember, Steve and I are desperate. Also, 2 days earlier, we realized that we'd only packed about 6 days worth of meals, seemed like. Right, Steve?
Yeah, something like that. 6 days worth of meals for a 12-day hunt.
Yeah. And we were honestly freaking out a little bit about food. At that point, we'd started rationing. Literally, you get an 1.5-inch piece of salami, you get 1 cheese stick, and you get 1 bagel. That's all you had all day.
Oh, my gosh.
For your lunch. And yeah, because we didn't know we were going to leave. So we were sitting there thinking, man, we got to kill something so we can eat. So we start sneaking down there a little ways, and it gets obvious that I'm going to be able to kill him with a bow. And so then I'll let you jump in here, Steve.
Yeah, so we're trying to set up. We got 2 small bulls, a pretty small bull, and then a little bit bigger, like kind of a small, what we call like a big raghorn, a raghorn bull elk, and they're sparring, and we're trying to call them, and they're not coming in. We're right on the edge of the lake. We just went in the brush like 5 yards. We kind of peek out, and we'd call, and they'd look our direction, and then go back to sparring. And they started kind of looking like they're going to walk into the brush. So I walk up to Lenny, and he's like, I don't want to shoot one with the rifle just yet, but do you? And, I'm just kind of sitting there going, not really, but man, we were literally, I think it was the night before that's when we figured out we were basically going to run out of food. Like, we did not have enough food to last the trip, or, we weren't going to die, but we would have been down to like, maybe 800, 1,000 calories a day for the last 3 or 4 days. So, getting a moose killed was kind of pretty high up on our list. Like, all right, once we do that, we're good to go, And
yeah.
So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna do it. Grab the rifle, start sneaking up the shoreline, and going back to the moose's vision. The wind was one thing we had. Was the wind was super, super consistent, always out of the north. So that was super helpful for us to hunt with. It wasn't switching directions all the time, so we kind of knew we could count on that. And sneak up the bank, get within 200 yards. And, I'm a terrible rifle shot. I think I could freehand a bow 100 yards better than I could a rifle. But I had a really good limb sticking out, and if I could put the rifle on it, and the bigger bull had just gone into the trees probably like 20 yards prior to me getting there. And I sat there for a few minutes, and I didn't think he was coming back out. And the smaller bull, he came out. He was right on the edge, and he came back out and stood in the water. And I was just like, okay, here we go. And took the safety off and just freaking drilled him on the first shot. I ended up shooting 2 more times. And he didn't go anywhere. He just kind of kept turning in circles. And then third shot, he just stood there and then eventually just flopped right into the water, and we're just like, holy crap, all right, that's cool. It's like day 7. The moose hunting's been tough. We got a moose down on the ground. We got food,
Yeah.
like, all right, now we can relax and start enjoying this. And I walk back down to Lenny, and, we high five, and then the kayak's like another 200 yards below us. So we start walking down the kayak. We get down there. We look back up to where mine was, and there's a moose standing there. And we both look at each other like, what the? Like, my bull got back up, like, how is that possible? Throw the binos up and realize that's the bigger bull. He came back out of the brush, and he was just sitting there like 2 yards away, just staring at the dead moose in the ground. So now it's Lenny's turn to take it back.
Yeah, it was really bizarre. I'm thinking after 3 rifle shots, that moose is going to be gone. Didn't even enter my mind that he'd still be there. Look back down there, and he literally just stands there and stares at this dead bull. I think it was like 5 minutes.
Yeah, at least.
It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life. He just sat there and, like, I think he just thought, like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you laying there? And I thought, man, I think I could sneak down this shoreline here and maybe get on this bull, because it was weird. So I go sneaking down the edge of the lake, and it's literally like marsh, it's lake, marsh, wall of brush. That's pretty much what you have to work with. And I'm kind of sneaking down there, and I'm able to kind of stay in the brush a little bit, and had a little trail in there. And then I got to a point where the little bit higher ground, when I mean higher, I mean like 3 inches higher than the water, kind of had a little bit of a peninsula that came out just a little bit. And by that time, he started walking towards us, walking right down the shoreline. And so I believe that he had heard us calling earlier, and, the other moose was dead. And so I think he started coming down where he heard the last moose. So he just started walking right down the shoreline, right towards me. And so I just kind of backed up to the brush a little bit, and he just keeps coming, and he's kind of got his head dropped, kind of swaying his horns. And as he's walking, I'm not exactly sure why they do it. I don't know if it's an aggressive thing or what, but they kind of make this kind of kind of as they walk. And he was kind of walking right down the shore, like towards where we were calling. And as he gets closer and closer, I'm thinking, man, if he just keeps walking on the angle he's on, he's going to walk right towards me, and literally he's going to be 5 yards when he sees me. And I started thinking about all these moose stories of people getting, and he kind of had this, like, I'm coming no matter what look to him. And I look around for a tree. I literally did this. I could feel my heart in my chest, like, beating, like, harder than it normally does. And it's just like boom, boom, boom. And I look around, I'm like, there's no trees, only brush. And I'm just like, oh, please skirt this little brush pocket that I'm in. And and then at one point he actually went into the brush, and I grabbed and I raked a little bit. That's one thing. Seems like these moose, raking was probably the most effective tool that we had. It seemed like they responded to raking better than any calling. And he popped right back out, started coming right down towards me. And he, fortunately, rather than coming right at me, which would have been a head-on 5-yard shot, he skirted this little brush pile, literally 10-yard shot, stopped right in my shooting lane, and I drew. And I was actually, I get excited hunting, and I was pretty dang calm. And I just remember just dropping my pins, and, sometimes when they're that close in the past, I've, maybe squeezed off a little too soon, but I just dropped my pin, perfect, squeezed off, and I just saw that tuft of hair go out right where my 20 pin was. And it's one of those shots where you're just like, he's dead. You just know it. It was just a great shot, fletching gone. But to my horror, he whirls, 2 jumps, he's swimming across the lake. And I'm
my goodness.
Oh, crap. And I'm sitting there looking at, and I'm like, there's no way he's going to make it. Because I knew he's dead. And he literally gets like right in the middle, like no close to the other side, no closer to my side. And you can see him just start struggling for a minute. Head goes underwater. He's dead.
Oh my goodness.
Right in the middle of the lake. So Steve's bull is like 200 yards up there, dead on the bank. Mine's dead, floating in the river, like 10 minutes apart.
Oh my gosh.
It was nuts.
Yeah. So the first thing we do is Lenny gets down to me. We're kind of like in shock for, I guess, a minute or two. Jump in the kayak, start paddling up there. Like, well, let's just get up to your moose, and we don't know if he's gonna sink, or we had no idea what was gonna happen. We tie. We had luckily the guide gave us like this 50-foot of like decent sized 3/4 inch rope. We tie it around the freaking horns and just tie it off real short. And Lenny just starts paddling like a bat out of hell. And we actually were able to freaking drag the moose to where we could get to like knee deep water. And we just, I described it as playing tug of war with the freaking thing. Just like literally probably took us half an hour to get that thing into the basically as far as we could get them, which was knee deep water. So we had 2 moose down. Mine was in water that was like 1.5 feet deep because it died right on the edge. And then Lenny's is literally like, it just full on in the water. And we weren't moving his moose 1 more inch. So that was fun. I think it took us 8 hours just to get those 2 moose quartered up, back straps off, rib meat off, neck meat off. And we ended up doing it, for having never handled an animal in the water. We came up with a really good system of they were laying on their sides, and we just split right up the belly and then just skin
just above the water line.
Yeah, just above the water line, and and skin all the way up to kind of the back straps, basically to the top of the spine, and then just flopped that whole hide, and so it was just kind of floating on the water. And mine wasn't near as challenging. But even with Lenny's, we did a heck of a good job keeping everything clean and stuff, considering, what the situation we had. Because the water his bull was in was just muck, just nasty muck, little bugs swimming around. I mean, you're sinking, it's knee deep, but half of that you're shin deep in mud. It took us 8 hours. We got him quartered up, and then, did we sail back to camp? Was that the night we sailed back to camp? Or was that no, that was the next day.
Yeah, next day.
That was the next day. So we kayaked from where we shot him to our camp. We had to kayak in that shitty little kayak freaking 2 miles. And the wind's always blowing in the evenings, and we're out in the middle of that lake doing freaking 360s in the kayak. And I'm sure Jason can relate. He has the same kayak.
Those kayaks didn't have a V hole on them, so they're flat bottom, and you'd get momentum going. You're like, we're cruising. All of a sudden, they just do a burnout, and you just spin around backwards, and you're like, what just happened? It's so frustrating.
Yeah, it was rough. So next night, or we went to camp that night. I think we had a little bit of our whiskey left middle of the trip. We polished that off, and next day we go to paddle back because we got to finish up, deboning last little bit, get the, cape the head, get the horns off, all that stuff. And we get the super windy that day. We paddle out. We basically got to paddle a mile along the shore to the east, and then once we hit that, we got to go a mile straight into the frickin' wind. We hit that. And I don't know how long it took us to get up there, Lenny, but we hit that wind, and there was no way we just weren't paddling it. And so we ended up like, Lenny got off and started walking through the brush. I tried paddling for like 200 yards. That wasn't happening. We started like carrying the freaking kayak over the muskeg on the shore, and holy crap, that was a pain in the ass.
Wow. So the conditions in terms of the meat and just kind of meat care, I mean, unique conditions with water, and then just the massive quantities. Did you have, decent temperatures where you weren't, worried about spoilage and things like that? Any extra precautions to keep it? I mean, what do you do? I mean, you can't really, I'm assuming there's not like trees to hang it, and then it's just so big. Yeah. Like, just talk about kind of managing and caring for the meat after the kill a little bit.
It was probably mid-20s in the mornings, pretty, like 30 to 25 is probably what I'd say in the mornings. And then, the high was never, I don't think it ever got to 50. It was probably in the mid-40s every day. So it was actually really good temperatures. Flies were not a problem. And where we were, bears are not an issue.
I gotta stop you right. Lenny rented a sat phone, and it's just one of those things that sticks in my head because he was talking to his wife Camille on the phone. She was asking about, well, are you worried about bears in there? And Lenny just like, without skipping a beat, he's like, not unless bears figured out how to grow gills and swim 24/7. You're like swamp bears.
It was so bad.
Oh, God.
That's funny.
Yeah, so as far as the meat, so we don't have to worry about flies, and we've heard that blowflies can be really bad in Alaska, but fortunately they were pretty much non-existent, and we didn't have to worry about bears, and we had great temperature, so it really wasn't any different. We brought an extra tarp, actually, which we ended up laying out on the ground, and then we just had game bags, put everything in the game bags, laid it on top of the tarp in some brushy shade, and it actually kept really well. Fortunately or unfortunately, Steve and I's bulls were definitely younger bulls, so it was really manageable, to be honest with you. The hinds were a little bit bigger than a really big bull, but not substantial. Would you agree, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, at 20-30% bigger. I mean,
yeah,
it wasn't double the size, but it was enough that one person could carry a hind quarter.
For a little ways.
A little ways.
Yeah.
I mean, they got to be at least 125, 130, 40 pounds. I don't know. They're heavy. But you could get it up and carry it. Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
So the one thing that is kind of crazy, it seemed like the front shoulders are significantly bigger than an elk.
Yeah. Yeah, way bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, did you notice that too, Jason?
Oh, yeah. I mean, way bigger, but they were much lighter. The hinds on my bull it took two of us to move them initially, and then when the pilot came to pick up mine, Tyler was out hunting, and I just ran back to camp. It was everything I could do to move that hind quarter by myself.
Really?
He was an older bull. It was, wow. And when I handed it to the pilot, he about took a digger off of the float on the plane because I just handed it to him like a cradle, and yeah, I had to help him get it in the plane. It was just the hinds, though. The hinds are pretty rough.
Yeah, we were wondering at that because we were like, these are big. They're not huge. Like, when we first saw our first moose, the thing looked like a freaking elephant. Like, it just was huge. And then once we had two on the ground, they actually got a little bit smaller for us. So we were wondering though what a big difference between a spike and a big bull elk is substantial. Right, so obviously your bull, Jason, was substantially bigger in body size as well.
Yeah, we were pretty blown away when we walked up on Tyler's, which was, from what we could tell, like a 3-year-old, like a raghorn or a 5-point kind of bull elk. And yeah, his looked more like an elk with 2-foot longer legs, and whereas mine looked like a couch with antlers. It was ridiculous.
Wow.
So Jason, okay. Give us the rundown on yours, because it sounds like it's a pretty cool story. How did it all play out for you?
Well, I don't know how cool it is, but it was convenient, that's for sure. So I had a friend in Bethel who I was messaging for weather reports, and his coworker had just killed like a 60-incher the day we landed. So his coworker kept on interjecting on satellite text with tactics, and we'd ask, questions, and he'd come back with, just little tips. And one of his tips was try calling from your camp in the evening, and then at night, since moose do everything on their own schedule at a slow pace, they might come in overnight and they might just bed up nearby. And then in the morning, when you get out of your tent, just be real quiet and kind of look around, and you might have a bull in your camp. So we did that. It was a real quiet night where our calls could act. It wasn't windy at all, so we knew our calls were being heard for a long ways away. And so I was the first out of the tent that morning, and I swamped over to the coffee pot, through the 6 inches of water, and I just barely fired up the coffee pot, and I look up over top of the tent, and there's my bull at 60 yards. And I just about fell down. I was like, holy, there's a bull in our camp. And I could tell he was big. And so I had to take about 5 steps to the rifle, and my bow was right there too. But I grabbed the rifle initially, and I pulled it up and put it on the moose, and the scope's completely fogged over because Tyler doesn't believe in lens caps on his scopes, apparently. So, and I've been freezing every night. So I'm taking my First Light fleece, the Halstead fleece, and I'm rubbing out each end of the scope trying to see, and I pull it up and I can kind of make out a black silhouette, and it's just like it's First Light in the morning. It's barely to where you can see, And the bull is just sitting there watching me do this. The wind's right, so he's not, he's not going to win me. And I finally, after like 3 different passes on the scope, I can make out the bull's chest. And right then he starts to turn sideways, broadside, like he might start to leave. And I had thought about the bow, but the 60 yards and he's getting ready to get the hell out of there. And we were so frustrated. I'm like, if it was like a 2-point yearling moose, I probably would have shot it at this point. I'm like, I don't care what it is. I'm going to notch a tag and bring home some meat. So he turned sideways and I could make out like a black blob in the scope because it's still fogged over, and I could tell a front leg. And so I just put it right behind that front leg and the shot was perfect. It hit like right where the lungs come together, right above the heart. He took like 10 steps and reared up like on his hind legs and splashed down. And there wasn't any water there where he landed, but he made water when he landed. Lenny and Steve know when he landed.
I understand that.
Yeah.
There's now water there. So, yeah. And Tyler at the time, I tried to whisper to Tyler in the tent, who was like maybe 15 feet away. I'm like, Tyler, because he's making much noise. I'm like, be quiet. There's a bull, and he didn't hear me at all. And so when the gun went off, I was literally shooting over top of the tent, and yeah, he's getting ready to crawl out of the tent, and I just hear him go, what the, just shit. And, yeah, and just after that, full-blown celebration, panic, everything, chest bumps, fives, hugging, just, pull down. So, yeah, it was, in the video, like the walking up video, my eyes are still all puffy from waking up. I mean, it was just total luck, kind of a gift. A bull walked into camp kind of thing. So, and luckily he was big. So he's kind of a freak bull. His one side is normal, like just a big, if he matched that side, he would have been 60 inches wide. But the other side has like 2 paddles, like 2 weird little miniature paddles and like a drop tine. It's just kind of a freak antler. So it's cool.
Wow. That is cool. That's very cool. Well, we're just about time here, and but let's talk some about getting meat and then, getting these racks back home, and what's that process like? I mean, is it you guys shipping things freight? How's all that working for you?
Yeah, that's been a very, very frustrating process for us. No, we didn't. Just kind of like when we hired somebody, we expected certain things, because we kind of wanted to get into tonight talking about things we would have done different and stuff like that. And we just kind of thought that they would give you like, this is this option and this is this option, and pros and cons and stuff like that. And it was really just kind of like, no one would give you a freaking answer on what you needed to do. And it was really frustrating. But basically, what we all ended up doing was they shipped our meat from Bethel to Anchorage. There's a place in Anchorage that's going to process all the meat, butcher it, package it, freeze it, and then they will ship it. Alaska Airlines has a air cargo service, and it's $1.50 a pound to get that meat back home. And so that's kind of what we ended up doing with the meat. What we kind of figured out, and the much better, cheaper option is you can get fish boxes. And if you have the ability to self-butcher up there, which Lenny and I had spent 2 days in Bethel before we could get our flight back home, we could have had the time to butcher that up, freeze it, put it in the fish boxes, and just check it on the plane. And that's definitely what we would do if we had to do it over again. So.
Yeah, it would have been much.
Those
much
boxes,
cheaper, I think we're. Go ahead, Jason.
Those boxes you can load up like you can put 100 pounds max in there, and they cost $75 to check. So doing math, that's 75 cents a pound versus $1.50, and you get to take it home right now.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. So our cost, to get it from Bethel to Anchorage, I think was 27 cents a pound on the bone. So you're talking $300 probably at least to get it there, and then. Processing in Anchorage is probably the same that you'd pay anywhere, and then you get the extra $1.50 to get it home. So, you're looking at $3-4 a pound by the time you get it home.
Yeah, definitely adds up. So,
yeah,
and then getting the antlers home, that's kind of still. I ended up, my bowl was small enough. I just cut the horns off at the skull, and just checked the horns on the plane. Tyler did the same, right, Jason? He cut the horns off, froze the skull, shacked the skull on the plane as well in a fish box and brought them home?
Yeah, he basically put Lenny's skull as well as his skull in the fish box, kind of like you put a pair of shoes in a box, just one each direction. And then he neither one of them are frozen. We just put frozen stickers all over the box so that the Alaska Airlines would take them because they're like, "This is frozen, right?" "Oh yeah, it's frozen." and then they threw the horns in another cardboard box, and then we also found 4 shed antlers while we were up there. And we kind of made a package of cardboard and shrink wrap that was really awkward, had no handles, but it made it home too. So that was kind of nice. In my bowl, I just didn't want to cut it off the skull too badly, and I wasn't sure if I definitely couldn't fit it in a fish box. I didn't know about the ability to shrink wrap them, so mine are still up there, and I'm not sure how. Sounds like it's going to be $1,000 to get them back as a European mount, which that's the cheapest option.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a headache for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wish we'd found some better articles, or we want to. I'll probably write something, or we'll talk about it again on all the little things we would have done different and learned during the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we didn't know the questions to ask because we never done it. But now that we've done it, we've kind of like, oh, okay, these are the questions that we should have asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like it would be incredibly helpful. I know that I've been researching some on Alaska for caribou, and I think there's even probably more information on caribou than moose, but still, it's hard to find all of the answers. Like, there's such scattered information. Sometimes you run into conflicting information. So, yeah, it would be awesome for to work on an article, or maybe we'll do another podcast specifically on all those little things, because that would be incredibly helpful for a lot of guys. So let's wrap up with one thing from each of you, Jason, Lenny, then Steve. What's the best memory or the worst memory or the most important lesson? Just kind of a quick tidbit. So Jason.
The best memory, there was a few of them, having that big 60-incher come in 60 yards and kind of do the swagger at us. That was almost made the trip right there, even as much as both of our kills. And then we also had a young bull come into 18 yards, got it all on film, grunting the whole way. He could have got an arrow really quick. So that was probably the highlights there. Things that I would have done differently. Definitely a pair of socks for each day, some waterproof shoes for inside my hip boots, tons of garbage bags and dry sacks, tinfoil. You have to have tinfoil we had to start a fire, because if you try to start a fire on the tundra, it just kind of burns down into it. If you put down tinfoil, then you can actually legitimately have a fire.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
Duralogs, maybe some of those logs would burn forever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we said that too.
Yeah, so tinfoil and Duralogs are on our list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So that's my quick list, I guess. Maybe not so quick.
No, that's good. How about you, Lenny?
Oh man. I mean, shooting my bull at 10 yards, I mean, you couldn't kind of ask for more. But probably what I walked away with was, I definitely don't hunt to kill stuff. I hunt for the experience. And unfortunately, this moose probably means a lot less to me because the experience wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
So I guess I walked away from that. Next time someone asks me, do you want to go somewhere? You got better odds of killing things. No, I don't. If it is at the expense of the experience of actually going. So, yeah. I mean, and the other awesome thing was when I got home, my 2 kids and my wife, they had painted me a great big old giant picture of a moose in the water, and my 4-year-old son was very convinced that I used a life jacket to get the moose out of the lake.
That's hilarious.
That you put the life jacket on the moose to float him out of the lake.
Yeah. He's like, Daddy, you had to use a life jacket to get the moose out of the lake, right? And I'm like, well, not exactly. No, you had to use a life jacket to get him out of the lake.
That's too funny.
Yeah, so it was great.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, how about you, Steve? What's kind of a big takeaway?
Yeah, one of the things Lenny and I talked about when we were up there is how fortunate, we're born, raised, grew up in Idaho, and we're so stinking spoiled here. And that's one thing we talked about up there was just like, we don't know how good we have it. We had lunch with a couple guys up in Anchorage when we flew in, and, they got to, even go hunt sheep, they got to fly 200 miles and hike freaking 10, 20 miles from there to get to places where they don't have to compete with other hunters. And it kind of blew our mind. And even this moose hunting was just like, we just don't realize how fortunate it is that we can just go fill up our truck, get some food for the weekend, and go hunt amazing, beautiful country. And frankly, we've got great hunting here in Idaho. A lot of guys like to complain here and there, but we've got great opportunity right at our back door. Some of the highlights from the trip was sailing back. So that the second day we went back, and where we couldn't paddle up to the moose to get him to finish the quartering and stuff like that. When we finally did get up there and finish, the wind was blowing so freaking hard, and we knew we couldn't paddle that kayak straight. And so we kind of got out there in the current, and I just started using the oar as a rudder. I just put it on the back end, and it was working like a champ. And Lenny's like, let me grab the Jimmy's tarp and see if we could sail. And he tied that onto the front of the kayak and then held it up with his arms, and we just hauled ass. Like, we were freaking laughing like we were freaking 8-year-old kids, at summer camp or something like that. And it was like,
we're like on plane, man. We're hauling.
We're hauling ass. And we definitely made it. Was a tough hunt. It was challenging to stay positive, and just wet and cold the whole time, and there just wasn't much fun about it. So we made as much fun as we could. We had these we don't even know what they were called, but we nicknamed them redback swamp mouse. And every night we'd have these freaking little mice coming to camp, and they just had these red streaks down their back. And so Lenny had mastered the art of shooting them with a judo point. It was this 60-yard pin at 3 yards, and I don't know how many of those suckers we killed. We took a good photo on the last day put it on a little dead branch, and Lenny stood like 15 feet back.
Yeah,
so it looks like it's a freaking boar. So we made the best of it. You just kind of got to accept your situation, whether it was having fun or just even the hunting. We had to quickly adapt to the conditions that we were dropped off in, and made the best of it. So and then things that would do different was, if somebody said, hey, I'm planning a trip to Alaska tomorrow, this is, what should I be doing? And I was like, pester the ever-living crap out of the person that you're hiring with questions. The more questions, the better, of the country you're going into, whether you can expect, what you need to be prepared and plan for, just all that stuff. Even I was talking to a guy, Jason, you're fortunate you were able to bring the sheds out. I talked to a guy who went on a caribou hunt a few years ago, and it was a drop camp scenario, and they picked up like 30 caribou sheds and 10 moose sheds, packed them all the way back to camp, had them sitting in there. They killed their caribou. The pilot finally came and got them, and the pilot refused to take the sheds on the plane. Said, absolutely not. We're not going to take these. And he was just said, we don't have the weight, we don't have the room, which they were kind of pissed, like, BS, we got all our gear in there, there's still room. So just ask as many questions in every different scenario that you possibly think of, because it's one thing that we didn't do. We just kind of went up there just assuming all was going to be great, and there's a lot of things that we learned, and things would have been different had we asked the right questions. Perfect example is Tyler with his hip waders. Like, we just got lucky that some people recommended we get those Neos River Trekker hip waders. Somehow we didn't get that message to Tyler, and I can imagine how miserable that hunt was. So
yeah,
that's fine. He was the most upbeat, happy. I mean,
oh yeah,
Tyler's the king of optimism. He's like, this isn't that bad. My toes are numb. They've been numb for 12 days, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's the one thing Lenny and I had. It was just bad weather, bad communication with the guide, bad location, bad hunting, but we had good gear. We didn't have really the major stuff fail us, short of our lighters not working for that one day. So
yeah, I think the biggest thing there is do not assume that the guide is going to spend a lot of time or effort, doing anything.
Carrying.
I mean, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, think of it as a taxi ride. and that's it. And don't, make sure that you ask all the right questions. And it's kind of like telling the taxi driver to take you to a good bar. What might be his good bar is not going to be your good bar. So I think it's a good idea to tell him what you want and you expect in a hunt. And I think it'd be a lot more fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, fellas, for your time. That's not only fun to hear about the stories, but learn some lessons along the way as well. So I appreciate it. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to send us your feedback to podcast@exomountaingear.com. If you're listening and use iTunes, would love to see a review there and would really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Hunt Backcountry Podcast.